Hello and welcome everyone, and hello and welcome Ezekiel. It's been a while, and a lot of people have noticed that it's been a while.
I'm here, so how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Apart from dealing with the cold weather of Scandinavia, which I think you are aware of, but
I think
otherwise
we're,
all is
we're
well.
on the same latitude, so we're also swarmed by ice in more ways than one.
Well, who would have thought growing up in Ethiopia that we would be dealing with this kind of weather? But such is life, and it's good that you could relate to my experience and I could relate to your experience. I think human sympathy is one of the powerful things. So solidarity with you, Iskel.
Yeah,
And
we have two types of ice here. That's what it is. There is a hot one, there is a cold one. So
well, variety is always a good thing.
yeah,
Uh, but have you been kind of minor digression? Have you been in Sweden in January, December, February? It's quite the experience, I must say.
have I been at what?
Have you been in Sweden or in Norway or in Finland?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I I was in Uppsala a couple of winters. So.
yeah, yeah. Well, if you are into winter sports, it's quite the experience. Into skiing and ice skating and those sort of things. It's a wonderful experience. Otherwise, you stay at home like me.
I haven't done that much. When I was in graduate school, we went up north in Michigan to try to ski, but it wasn't fun. When you're an adult, you can't learn it. But yeah, I've tried it, but no skiing.
And you could break your neck most dangerously. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the snow is really fluffy, but I haven't tried it since my graduate days, and I'm not going to start it now.
Well, enough with the small talk, as the Swedes say, and we're going to get straight into Ethiopian matters. And Ezekiel, usually we tend to talk about daily events, what's happening in Ethiopia, trying to make sense of the war, of the conflicts, of the instability, of the downward spiral, and all that. And today, I thought we would take a step back and try to understand why. Is it that Ethiopia is always a land of conflict, a land of war? Why it always seems that the country is on the brink of war, if it's not on war footing already, or war is raging in the country? Where did these bad things come from? What is the foundation? And you have written a lot of essays on this. You have tried to understand the country. You have tried to understand the thinkings in the country, the ideas, the ideologies, the different political thought processes. And today, I thought you would help us make sense of where these ideas come from. And one of the constant themes in Ethiopia is this perpetual struggle between the center and what are conventionally called the peripheries. Forces that want a centralized structure, and forces and people who want more autonomy and more power and more self-agency. And although the war manifests itself in different forms, really at the foundation, it is these ideas that seem to be in constant fight against one another. And I would like you to give us first your sense of what I briefly described. I think it's very rough, my description. And then we're going to try to explain where these ideas come from. So what is your sense of why Ethiopia is the way it is in terms of it being the kind of country that I described?
Well, I guess what you're referring to is why is Ethiopia unable to resolve its um, the causes of the conflict, because Ethiopian in the modern Ethiopian state, uh, since its founding, had been uh, in a state of civil war or in actual civil wars. Much of its history It's like that. Why is this happening? Why is there a recurrent cycle of conflict, economic downturn, and civil unrest, and change of government, collapse of government, change of government, and then we start all over again. So it's the cycle. It's a cycle. Not every moment of change is the same. There were opportunities for real transformation to resolve historical issues or historically rooted issues that contribute to the cycle of violence and skirmishes and conflict and wars. But I think there is a fundamental one, as far as I'm concerned, is that the Ethiopian state-building effort, much less the nation-building effort, but the state-building effort has not succeeded. So Ethiopia is basically a state in a perpetual cycle of trying to remake itself because the elite do not agree to share power, basically. Because there is a fundamental difference as far as Ethiopia's political class envisioning what kind of state Ethiopia deserves or needs. Some, I call them, on one side, I call them the Ethio-nationalists. Some call them civic nationalists. But the group itself calls itself civic nationalists. It's basically Ethio-nationalists who believe that Ethiopia is a unified polity, has always been a unified polity where citizenship transcends ethnicity, basically denying that Ethiopia is a multinational, multi-creedal country that was put together by empire builders. That would be denied, and they say that, or claim that Ethiopia is a polity where citizenship transcends ethnicity. It's post-ethnic society. Okay, that's one side. Whether that is true or not is another matter. It's for investigation. But on the other side, there are the ethno-nationalists. I know that Ethiopian nationalist groups don't like the term ethno-nationalist. They say it is nationalism. I agree with them to some extent, but ethno is to designate that this is within the same country. It's not like nations that are dispersed under different political jurisdictions, but within the same country contesting power. So the ethno-nationalists believe that Ethiopia is basically a federation of nations and nationalities with the right to self-rule, self-determination, including secession. So these are the two competing ideas that have always pitted one group against the other. These are unresolved issues. The elites have not agreed, have not sat down to work out their differences on what kind of state Ethiopia should be, on how this centrifugal forces, the ethno-nationalists who had always expressed dissatisfaction with their participation or level of participation in politics and economy, the political economy of the country. So this has not been worked out. It's not been worked out still. They actually take turns. They take turns, these two groups, they take turns to wage war against the other, to eliminate the other rather than to work out their differences. I can give you some examples. Like in 1987, the civic nationalists, the Ethiopian nationalists, acknowledged for the first time in the political history of Ethiopia that Ethiopia has a problem of ethnic marginalization and ostracization. So they crafted a constitution, 1987 constitution, that tried to accommodate the ethnic or the ethno-national questions. They tried to accommodate, but they maintained power in the center and concentrated it in the center, and then also continued the unitary shape of the government. In 1991, they were defeated. The ethno-nationalists came into power. They put in place a constitution of nations and nationalities, and a federal system, a multinational federal system, put in place a mechanism and a formula to share power, but that was also defeated for other reasons, or not defeated, but could not continue. And in 2018, there was a chance to improve on that, but instead the Ethio-nationalists or the civic nationalists reasserted themselves. So there is always this cycle. Instead of resolving the issue, they want to eliminate the other. So Ethiopia has not completed its state-building effort. So we are in the cycle, and I think we could continue to add, but I think that's the fundamental one, exacerbated from time to time by the rounds of conflict and the desire to settle scores violently against the other.
Well, interesting you say that in 1987, even the Derg tried to recognize ethnicity and made some concessions. And I find that interesting. Maybe let me set the context, because also you used the term in one of your essays where you're trying to make sense of why this is the way it is. You used the term Addis Ababa-based interest groups. And it seems to me that what generally happens is these Addis Ababa-based ethnic interest groups tend to wield a lot of power over successive regimes. So, for instance, during the Haile Selassie regime, when the Eritreans started resisting, there were people in the Haile Selassie, and you know this better than me, there were people in the Haile Selassie court who argued that it was better for Ethiopia to concede to Eritrea on some fronts so that the Eritreans would not wage armed struggle. And they were defeated by these Addis Ababa-based interest groups. And when Derg came, you just give us kind of an instance of what happened. There was an attempt to give recognition, but then it didn't go far enough. And the same happened during the APRDF generally, and even during Abiy, you describe in the essay, you say that it was these civic nationalists who forced Abiy to do away with the constitution and to veer towards Unitarianism and all the things that have happened the past 7 years. So there are these people in Addis Ababa who seem to wield a lot of power. Do you recognize these people, and who are they, and what does their power come from?
Yeah, the Addis Ababa group, and well, thank you for bringing that up. The Addis Ababa interest groups; those are not ethnic groups. It's not an ethnic group, and that's not to say there was no domination, ethnic domination. I think one of the articles that you referred to actually talks about ethnocracy. That there has always been in Ethiopia ethnic politics. It's not something that was introduced by the ethnic-based constitution or by the multinational constitution. It's not. Ethnicity has always been a fact of life, and ethnic power has always been related to ethnicity since Gondorian times. What that simply means is the dominant group, the dominant culture asserts itself and its priorities over others. But what I mean by Addis Ababa is like the imperial period. The formula for state building or even nation building under the imperial period is assimilation, the deracination of ethnic identities, and the attempt to flatten out any identity and then make it up to something very new, which is called the Ethiopian civic identity. So the denial, complete denial that there are no ethnic groups in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a unified state. That is the assimilationist then. What I meant by the 1987 one is the accommodationist. they realized that ethnic groups, ethno-national groups in Ethiopia do exist, and they do have political questions. There is marginalization on the basis of ethnicity. There is a dominant one, and there are others that are collaborating with them. There is a dominant culture that gives precedence to the culture, the psychosocial structure, and the priorities of one group. That becomes the dominant group. And they always have their associates. And these are the groups that are taking turns in Addis Ababa. They are drawn from the interest group. They're drawn from nearly all ethnic groups, but they operate under one dominant group, under the empire and the military. It is the Amharic-speaking group. Everybody has to assimilate to that. But under the military, they realize that we can't deny that this is a country of nations and nationalities. They espouse socialism. So they did not deny. They do exist as a matter of fact. But the power structure didn't change. The power structure under the imperial system continued under the military regime. What changed was the economic base and the ideology that oppression is not to be tolerated, that workers, so they were internationalists, to put it, even though they were operating within the framework of one nation as a national context, Ethiopia, but they were also aspiring to become internationalists to unify the workers of all countries. So their goal was not assimilation, but they simply recognized ethnic rights, the right to self-determination, because of their ideology, and they drafted a constitution which accommodated. But the 1995 constitution actually gave recognition to them and extended the right to rule themselves, to self-rule. Not only that, it also made the country a country of willing nations and nationalities who decided by a constitution to live together, by a constitution to be what the constitution says, a political and economic community. That's what the constitution says. Instead of saying a country based on soil and blood, it recognized that this is a country of nations and nationalities held together as an economic and political community. That is what the 1995 Constitution was. And I've said in my writing that this has worked. This has worked. This is actually a multinational federation of all the federal experiments in the world. This is a multinational federation that actually worked, not perfectly, but in addressing the three major issues in Ethiopia that divides the Ethiopian elite and the Ethiopian people, because the idea of the elite percolates down to the different groups. So the Addis Ababa group, they always rally around the center. Whoever is in power, assumes power, they rally around the center and they reimpose their will, their economic and political priorities, not to advance the cause of the country, but to advance a private interest. Look, after 2018, when people who completely misunderstood the nature of change that occurred in 2018 came to power suddenly. They came to power. They did not understand the historical roots of the uprising. They did not try to address the issues. They did not consider them real. They were influenced by this Addis Ababa elite, economic, cultural, epistemic elite that has congregated in Addis Ababa, that is not associated with any interest, ethnic priorities, but an interest group. But they use all of these trappings about ethnicity or culture or whatever is ready to work for them. But by 2018, they again surrounded the new regime headed by the Prosperity Party, and they rallied to the cause. Keep in mind, this Addis Ababa-based group, when I mean Addis Ababa-based group, they're not drawn entirely from one ethnic group, but subscribe to the cultural priorities of that ethnic group. They co-opt the people that came to power and advance their cause. Let me say this and I'll stop. The Tigray War, 75% of the Tigray War was not about the power play between the two, the conflict between the two ruling elite in Addis Ababa and Mekelle. 75% is because of Western Tigray. There is an economic priority for the Addis Ababa ruling class. So they always use the center against the periphery. That's basically what I was trying to say. At each political dispensation, or during the various political dispensation, there is a formula: assimilation for the imperial period, accommodation for the military period, the formula, and recognition during the multinational federalist period. And now it's all about power. No formula. I have written another one, say the end of state building in that area. There is no formula of state building right now. It is simply wielding brute force, brute power, with absolutely no idea to remake the state. What would be the final logical outcome of this effort? When you refuse to share power with the periphery and then only concentrate on advancing the interest of only the interest group in Addis Ababa, well, this is the time that you can be rest assured that there is nothing that is going to hold this country together. The possibility of breakup, the possibility of implosion has never been more real than it is right now, because there is no formula of governing. There is absolutely no formula. Prosperity is not a formula for state building. Everybody desires it individually, corporately. Everybody wants to be rich, but that's not a formula for governing.
A lot of interesting points, Ezekiel, and we'll try to explore each one of them, time permitting. And maybe let's begin with this whole notion of ethnicity and ethno-nationalism, because they strike me as the central pointers here. And maybe let's start by giving the devil is due. The people who say that ethnicity and ethno-nationalism are not sustainable organizing principles would say that they always lead to instability. They would say that because Ethiopia is a fixed pie, if you make ethnicity an organizing principle, there will be a zero-sum game between the different ethnic groups in the country. And they will point to the war in Tigray, to the ongoing war in Oromia, to the war in Amhara, and they will present them as exhibits that this system doesn't work. They would say that these are cases of the chickens coming home to roost, because ethnicity was made to be the central organizing principle under the APRDF. Whereas you seem to be saying that this is actually something that works. So how do you reconcile these two things then?
Well, like I said earlier, ethnicity or ethnic-based rule, what I called ethnocracy, is not something that was manufactured by the multinational federalist forces. Multinational federalism and the constitution of nations and nationalities, as Professor Faisal Nahum described it, they did not create it. They did not create the ethnicity. They simply recognized, as I was saying earlier, that Ethiopia's multinational constitution and the federal governing structure did not open previously non-existent fault lines. I remember one Herbert Lewis, an anthropologist who wrote in 1991 exactly that idea, saying ethnicity is on the rise globally, not just in Ethiopia. I remember a very seminal article that he wrote in 1991, because there emerged those two sides locked into a debate about whether Ethiopia is a country of equal citizens or a country based on ethnocracy. He wrote, as a man that had observed the Ethiopian political scene for a very long time, and he simply recognized that major fault lines in Ethiopia are based on ethnicity. They always existed in Ethiopia, and they should not be denied or deplored or ignored, because at the time in the 1990s, right after the end of communism, or the option that people had under that the end of communism itself, says people actually in the world all over are actually going back to their ethnicity, because this international aspiration or aspiration for internationalism had completely collapsed. So he actually predicted that ethnicity in the world today is the powerful base for feelings, associations, interests, and motivations. That it's going to be that way, and it's not only Herbert Lewis, an anthropologist at the University of Wisconsin, who said that with regard to Ethiopia. This was also a debate internationally in which Samuel Huntington actually predicted the organizing force in the world in the future will not be liberty, equality, and justice, but ethnic and religious affiliation. That's on the rise. So for Ethiopian elite to deny that ethnicity is a factor for organizing political demands, political power, or exercising political power, is just simply to deny a fact that Ethiopia needs a democratic pluralism, social justice, and respect for the right of its nations and nationalities. Recognize that and try to operationalize. But we're just backing off from it, and look at what's happening because we deny these factors exist. Look at where we are as a country right now, on the verge of disintegration. And this cycle keeps on going, by the way. This cycle is receding at some point in time, and mostly actually under the multinational arrangement. This was the time, with the exception of the time that there's always been a civil war. This 30 years, the 30 years of multinational federation was actually relatively a placid time in Ethiopia. Maybe there were some minor clashes, and violations of human rights. But of course, this is also by the TPLF-led people who were extracted from Tigray. Whether some people from Tigray and TPLF say that we shared power with others, that's not the perception. The OPDO was created by the TPLF. The others were also co-opted by TPLF. For the South, it was created. That was the perception that existed. And perception is as real as genuine action. So that is the way it's perceived. So the ethnocratic nature is there, but denying that the state is captured by a group that advances a certain historical narrative and cultural symbols and political interests is not to address the issue, because it leads to ethno-national backlash. It always leads to an ethno-national backlash. Look at what's happening right now. This government is under, I'm sure some Oromos try to deny that, well, this is not our government. To some extent it is true, but for people who are watching it, It was said globally and domestically, the Oromo for the first time rose to the pinnacle of power, even though that is not historically true. They did come, recognize, saying that we are Oromo, and the system is dominated by them. The rest are allies for them. TPLF, Tigray resisted, but now they have their own interlocutors to. They try, it's failing, but there is a group called. I'm not going to name the names, but there is a group that the Oromo-led, the OPDO-led Ethiopian government is recruiting to try to add Tigray into the central government politics. The Addis Ababa group, the Addis Ababa group. Now you get that, right? The Addis Ababa group. So you have extracts from Tigray, poached from the TPLF, and now they are in Addis Ababa. They are the advocates for Tigrayan interest as well. So that is really coming back. It's bringing back under now OPDO tutelage. There is that group that is emerging. There are Amharas in it. They don't advise Amhara interest. The Amhara region is being bombed every day. Tigray is almost at war. Oromia is almost burning. But the interest group in Addis Ababa has beautified Addis Ababa, and they're very comfortable in Addis Ababa. That's what I meant. It always goes back to the Addis Ababa group. But under whose tutelage this time? Under whose leadership? Who are they assisting? Who are they collaborating? The Oromo. The Oromo are at the pinnacle of power. They take turns. The Amhara, and then the Tigrayans, and now the Oromo. We all tried it now. We all tried it. But the backlash from the excluded group emerges, and the excluded group mobilize against domination, and that is happening around the country. As long as we don't stop rejecting compromise or political compromises, as long as we don't stop demonizing dissent, like for instance the TPLF refusing to join Prosperity Party should not be demonized. It should be a freedom that should be respected for political parties. Or if the TPLF organized elections in Tigray, that should also be respected. Should not be demonized, because it always leads to this zero-sum. That's what you say, zero-sum vision of the power in Addis Ababa. It's an interest group taken from all kinds of groups. They form a group there, and they wage war against dissent groups outside Addis Ababa. I guess that's the cycle that is going on still now.
It's interesting that you point that ethnicity is a factor of life, not just in Ethiopia, but is something that is growing even globally. Because now, really what is happening among the right-leaning parties across Europe and in the US, I suppose, is they are challenging the assumption that we had until today. The assumption until today was that if you moved into country X and had passport and pay taxes and all that, that you really truly belong to that country. But they are saying now, no, ethnicity actually matters. Yes, you might become a citizen and all that, but ethnicity is an important fact. And you're not going to elide that. That is really what they are saying, whether it's in Sweden or... So it's becoming more and more recognized even in the West, and I find that interesting. And even the backlash is happening in the West as well, because what people are saying is because identity-based politics was pushed far to the left, now there is a backlash to it. So there are parallels between what is happening in Ethiopia and in the West as well. So that is a slight digression. But in terms of the Addis Ababa-based interest groups, Ezekiel, because on the face of it, the belief that everything has to be central seems to be suicidal. I told you before we started recording, the attempt by the, what was his name, the Eritrean Derg high-ranking official, Aman Amdom, that because the Eritreans had by then started the armed struggle, he was trying to meet them halfway so that the armed struggle could be avoided, so that Eritreans could be reintegrated into Ethiopia, by making some concessions, by giving them a degree of self-autonomy and all that. But he was bitterly opposed by these Addis Ababa-based groups. And the result is that Eritrea became independent, which is something that they regret, these Addis Ababa-based interest groups. Even the case of Tigray in 2018, when Tigray refused to join the Prosperity Party and decided to hold elections in defense of the federal government, the Addis Ababa-based interest groups who care about Ethiopia should have supported that move, because if the Tigrayans had been given what they wanted, war wouldn't have happened and Ethiopia wouldn't have been ruined in the way that it has been ruined. So they really are advancing views and policies that are counter beneficial to the country. I don't know if it's clear, and you wonder why, or whether they are aware that their views and beliefs and positions are counter to the interests of Ethiopia.
Yeah. Now, what you said about the global situation, it's also part of the theoretical foundation of state building advanced by the Addis Ababa-centered power structure. Let me emphasize again so that my listeners also understand what I'm saying. When I say Addis Ababa-based, I am talking about the interest group that is drawn from all ethnic groups, and they form an interest for themselves. Remember, they were trying to call themselves Addis Ababa. They were trying to create a new ethnic group because this ethnicity is not going away as they expected. So they wanted to create even Addis Ababa as different, an ethnic group by itself. And I remember one of my colleagues who was part of the government, now is not, was saying that there was a real effort to define Addis Ababa as an ethnic group by itself, a self-ruling ethnic group. Now, the theoretical foundation is that modernity in the 1960s governed all reforms, political, economic, global, believing that modernity would, in this case in Ethiopia, would deracinate ethnicity, and that politicians and academics simply refuse to accept that the ethnic character and the political implications of ethno-nationalism, simply denying it, to deny it because there is a theoretical foundation. Modernization would get rid of it, right? That's the belief, the theoretical or philosophical foundation. Did it happen in real time, in history? Did it happen? I think you and I just talked about it, that what events in the world have proven in the last 30 years is what Samuel Huntington predicted, not that modernization and modernity is going to create a cosmopolitan culture in the world. That did not happen. Ethnic and religious identities are actually gaining momentum, gathering strength around the world. That's the reality. Now, you said something about, the question is about Eritrea and others. Yes, Eritrea, the Eritrean struggle started in 1962 because Ethiopia dissolved the federation. That's how it started. Now, I know many Eritreans because when I lived in Addis, I used to go to a church in Addis Ababa where the majority of the churchgoers there were partly from the Eritrean Evangelical Church and partly from the Walega Evangelical Church. So I know them. I know I've had friends and older people and former administrators in the federation. So I quite understand their feelings. And the younger people under the Derg, they were pushed out of feeling. They were pushed by the brutality of the Ethiopian government. And here I'm not talking about theory or empirical. I'm talking about people, human beings you can listen to and feel for them. You could have a fellow feeling. When my friend has lost his own sister. They raped and killed her. And this is the kind of things that actually pushed the Eritreans out of having a feeling toward being Ethiopian. Keep this in mind, it's the unionists within Eritrea who decided to join themselves with Ethiopia. Under the federation, when the federation was dissolved, and I remember this, having a conversation with none other than Bitwadet Asfaha Walda Mikhail, who was the last chief executive. I tell you, Tekline, because I was so interested in this, and he was a Catholic, but he had a friend, a minister friend, who introduced me to him. He was telling me, look, we decided to come and join Ethiopia because we felt more Ethiopian than not. But that did not mean we were unable to govern ourselves. He said to me, the crown representative during the federation was General Abiy Abebe, a Shawa, and a Disge from Shawa. He was the crown representative, representing the crown. Now that Eritrea abolished the federation, he had to go back because there is no federation. He was representing nobody, right? But he was made the administrator of Eritrea right then. And Walda Walda Mariam, an assassination attempt was carried out on Walda Walda Mariam, who opposed the appointment of a non-Eritrean to govern Eritrea. And their grievance was that these were the unionists, for God's sakes. These were the unionists saying this. The unionists were saying, we could have governed ourselves. We came into Ethiopia volitionally. We wanted to join, but we did not surrender our right to rule ourselves. He named a man named the Jazmat, somebody, he was a loyalist, but he was Eritrean. He could have been the next administrator, and that is where our feeling for Ethiopia started to fray. So Eritrea was trying to return to the federation. The Eritreans were trying to go back to the federation. Even in the 1980s, I heard that Isaias Afwerki was saying, if the federation returned, we would have accepted it. But the Derg government said, we're not going to negotiate with bandits. Aman Mikhail, when he went there, the people in Eritrea thought that one of them had risen to the pinnacle of power in Addis, and they were willing to settle for a federation. But Aman was killed. For what? Because Mengistu Haile Mariam wanted power. So the case in Eritrea is it's not seen like that Eritrea always wanted to secede. That is not historically true. Eritrea wanted return of the federation, return of self-rule, even an appointment of an Eritrean to govern Eritrea on behalf of Haile Selassie, on behalf of the crown. That was not done. It's the same in Gondar, by the way. The same feeling in Gondar, the same feeling in Gojam. The rebellion in Gojam was Haile Selassie went there, and this is the same Bitwadet Asfaha telling me. I don't know if it makes sense in English, but it is in Amharic. The governor in Gojam at that time was named Sahayu Nkoselassie. And Haile Selassie was asking the farmers, he said, how is the rain? Zinabun Betno. And people said, the rain is fine, but we are tired of the sun, meaning Sahayu, the man. The Gojam people were not happy that they were ruled by someone from Shawa, from the center of power. I could say the same in Gojam, but it will take in Gondar. It will take the same time. The same thing. In Tigray, what was the Wayane number 1? What was Wayane number 2? And now Wayane number 3. What is it? What is the Tigray asking for? Except self-rule. What is it that they are asking? Except not to be excluded and treated as second-class citizens in their own country. Why are they paying? Why is Tigray willing to pay in the millions? Shed the blood of their own children, their own sons and daughters in the first Wayane, that was bombed by British planes. The second Wayane that surrendered the lives of 100,000 up to 100,000 people, and 1 million in the third Wayane. What are they? Is it just, it's TPLF? It's just envy that there is somebody else is in power? No. There's a real demand in Ethiopia to counteract ethnocracy. Nobody wants to be ruled from the center. The formula of self-rule and shared rule in Addis Ababa would have worked, but the power that is assembled in Addis Ababa always refuses to share power, and instead they always bring the violence, bring on the apparatus, the security apparatus of the state to land on the people in the periphery. What was in Oromia? What was the demand in Oromia? What was the demand in Bale? What was the demand? What were they demanding? Say they don't want to be ruled. Even as early as the 1930s in Oromia, in the Western Oromo Confederation, when the Italians came, they said, we don't want to be ruled by the center anymore. We have established a Western Oromo Confederation. As early as 1936, for God's sakes. But the center refuses. Instead, they come up with a policy of assimilation that would simply deny you exist as an ethnic group. These are real. Okay? So were there possibilities that Ethiopia could have chosen a trajectory that would have led to a state that is for all its citizens on many occasions? 1974, 1991, which was, by the way, by 1991, when the ethno-nationalists defeated the center, when they won, when they had all the power to dismantle Ethiopia, when Tigray could have led the ethno-nationalist groups, the Oromo, the Tigray, the Somali, when they could have led them to the disintegration of the Ethiopian states, the Ethiopian polity, they brought it together under a compromise. There is a secessionist force, there is the central government force. The compromise between the centripetal forces and the centrifugal forces, the ethno-nationalists and the Ethio-nationalists. The compromise was a multinational federation that would have led to stability, to peace, and to economic prosperity. And it did start to take root to some extent under that compromise. But compromise is a dirty word in Ethiopia. It's always zero-sum game. It's always zero-sum game. It's always winner-takes-all political culture. And no one is immune from this. It is a syndrome that whoever gets into the palace of Menelik II succumbs to. Whether you are Amhara, whether you are Tigrayan, or Oromo, you get into that place, you get captured by the Addis Ababa group, and get into the same cycle of winner take all and marginalize everybody. And that's the cycle that is going on even today. Even today, even as we speak today, there is a power struggle between these two forces.
We'll talk more about that capture, because it strikes me as a very interesting thing. But on your point about Eritrea, you say that if Ethiopia had made concessions and returned or reinstated the confederation or federation, that the Eritreans would have been happy and they wouldn't have gone all the 30-year struggle and independent journey on the painful experience and all that. I was reading this article, to my utter shame, I forgot the author, but she's a professor at the University of Manchester, and her essay deals with why Eritreans decided to wage armed struggle. And she makes the interesting point that Eritreans were, this is under Haile Selassie rule, that Eritreans were kind of reluctantly happy to put up with everything. What did it for them, what was the straw that broke their back, was that Haile Selassie started preferential treatment. He started preferring Amhara-speaking people to Eritreans. And that is what they couldn't take. That was the thing that made Eritreans to completely turn their back on Ethiopia and start supporting the struggle for independence. which is interesting because the conventional wisdom in Addis Ababa is that the Eritrean struggle was led by ethnic fanatics and all that. But it's completely the opposite. It was a reaction even in the case of Eritrea. And it's an interesting insight, and it busts the conventional wisdom in Ethiopia. Of course, that is the point you're making as well, that whether it's the Tigrans or the Oromos or the Eritreans, their struggle has always been a backlash to how they have been treated by the center. I wonder if you would like to add something to that. Otherwise, we return to the capture that you mentioned, because that's interesting as well.
I think it's Sarah Vaughan, the article that you're talking about.
It could be Sarah Vaughan, but it could be Tanya. But I will be sure to add the article in the description for our viewers. I just tried to check it on my phone, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to speak like, not in scholarly terms, but to give meat to the discussion when I talked about my own friend, Eritrean friend, whose sister was raped and then killed. This was done by the thousands. All right, true. Eritreans came back after 50 or 60 years under the Italian rule and 10 years of British rule, because Eritrea and Ethiopia share cultural and religious traditions. They have the same cultural and religious traditions. If there was a willingness on the part of the Ethiopian center to share power with the periphery, the Eritreans were okay with that. They accepted the federation as was decided by the United Nations, because within Eritrea itself there were two visions. One is separation, and the other is union with Ethiopia, and the compromise position is a federation with Ethiopia. It's a compromise position between the two tendencies within the Eritrean body politic. But the dissolution of the federation itself was led, maybe encouraged by the Ethiopians, but it was really done by the unionists themselves. They are the ones that said, because of this cultural, religious, and geographic proximity, being considered another country was no use for us. And this is the words that I heard from Bitrata Asfaha himself, who ended the federation, and then he was appointed Minister of Justice in the Ethiopian cabinet. So they chose, because of these historical, religious, cultural, and geographic affinity that Ethiopians and Eritreans had. That's still there. It's still there. It's going to be very difficult to pull all of those strings out of each other and make Eritrea and Ethiopia different. It's going to be difficult, right? But it's not only that. It's not only that they were not ruling themselves. It's not about politics alone. It's the brutality. The brutality. You're denied the right to self-rule and self-protection, and they're exposed to the coercive power of the center that comes down at you violently. It's the brutality that pushes people over the edge. It's the brutality. It's not just the political grievances. It is the fact that even if you accept the overlordship of the imperial center, you're not going to live in peace because you are an Eritrean. Under the Derg, the brutality was unimaginable, unparalleled. Only Eritreans feel it. The rest of Ethiopia doesn't know it because they don't know any Eritrean. They can't feel it. They can't have a fellow feeling for them. What motivates Eritreans to opt for independence in 1991 is the brutality. It was the brutality. I just wanted to add that to it. It's how you survive within Ethiopian empire that really pushes people over the edge to seeking secessionism. Okay, I've already said that, and I agree with the article that you quoted, that it is the political marginalization within Ethiopia. But that's not only the political marginalization, it is also how you exist. It's the existential threat to you, the brutality that you will lose your life, your limb, and your household, your homestead, and your own life. It is that. Now, take this from me. I don't have anything to prove it. Tigray, as I said in 1991, they could have led to the disintegration of Ethiopia, but they opted for a federation that would recreate the Ethiopian state, in which all the ethnic groups, if equality is not ensured automatically, it is accepted, recognized that it is a desirable goal. And the formula was put in place. The constitutions of nation and nationalities, and the multinational federation as a political arrangement for governing Ethiopia. The TPLF leaders could have done that. They could have killed all of the Derg officers, by the way, the Derg officials, the Derg period officials. They did not. They did not kill all of them. They brought them to justice, for God's sakes. They had the option. Tigray leaders had the option to do away with the state. They had the option to declare Tigray independent in 1991 and let everybody become independent. They could have presided over the managed disintegration of Ethiopia. They did not do that. They did not choose to do that. But in 2018, at the end of their dispensation of dominance, their dominance at the end of it, what happened to them? What happened to them? Genocide. The brutality that was meted out on Eritrea is now meted out on Tigrayans and everybody else. And ask me, maybe you're from Tigray. The feeling among Tigrayans is that, well, we defended Ethiopia all the time against the Italians, against the Turks, against the Egyptians. We did that. We chose to be in Ethiopia and create a multinational. We pushed the oppressive Derg regime. We paid the price for every household in Tigray paid a price. I'm talking about the sentiment among Tigrayans right now. We did that. We willingly surrendered power when people were expressed their dissatisfaction and said somebody else should try it. We did that. We did all of that voluntarily. We could have clung to power. That did not ensures that their continuity in power, but they did that. They did willingly transferred power to another group. And what did they get for that? Genocide, ethnic cleansing, all crimes imaginable. And that will push the Tigrayans over the edge, just like it did with Eritreans. This cycle is not going to continue indefinitely to the end of days. One by one, the Addis Ababa center, one by one is going to push them over the cliff, all of them. They have done it physically. So many Tigrayans were pushed over the cliff in western Tigray, over the cliff. Dead, killed Tigrayans were pushed over the cliff, right? That's physical. But it also symbolizes that now prevails, the sentiment that prevails among Tigrayans. We did all of this. We wanted to be Ethiopians. Now, the Ethiopian officials are telling the Tigrayans, you have the constitution that you designed. Why don't you exercise that and go? Openly they tell Tigrayans. How do they feel? How do Tigrayans feel? I'm not a Tigrayan, but am I telling you something that you're not feeling? That's what some Tigrayans are not feeling. That's the sentiment that is going on. It will push them over the cliff. So what the article said is right, but I just wanted to project it to the future as well. This is going to be the same for Tigrayans. I could go on. I could talk about the Somalis, for instance. People in Ethiopia don't know the Somali region. They still refer to them. High-ranking officials in the Ethiopian government, they refer to them Somalia. Somalia, for real, for God's sake. They call the Somali region as Somalia. And of course, I understand because I am. I've read the stuff, and I know people from that side. When one of my friends was elected to the parliament at some point in time in the 1990s, and someone from the Amhara region told him, "Oh, you speak Amharic so fluently, and how come? Is it? What do you mean? I'm an Ethiopian." These are the people that don't know that Somalis are Ethiopians as well. They refer to them as Somalia. And today, for the second round under this regime, drought is killing the cattle and the people in the Somali region. The center is not doing a damn thing about this. Nothing. Expect the Somalis who do not speak Amharic, expect them to feel like they are Ethiopians. I did not even talk about how historically they were treated. So one by one, the center that is seeing only power and economic well-being for themselves, the group, they're going to push a lot of people over the cliff, empowering the centrifugal forces that have, in 1991, chose to recreate Ethiopia, live together in Ethiopia, in choosing a compromise through dialogue rather than violence. But the cycle will continue for a while. But since there is really no organizing principle today in Ethiopia, the centrifugal forces are going to get stronger, including in the Amhara region. The region that actually wanted to be the center all the time is now going to feel they're ostracized, marginalized, and carrying the brunt of the fury of the federal government day in and day out.
Well, I think that the center's knowledge of the peripheries is very sketchy, to say the least. Is it? Do you not find it fascinating in a negative way that not many people in Addis Ababa try to learn languages, foreign Ethiopian languages, Tigrinya, Afan, Oromian, and other languages? You don't see that. I'm not demanding that everybody be like you and be fluent in Tigrinya, Amharic, and English, and Afan, Oromo, and maybe God knows others. But you don't see that kind of people applying themselves to learn about different peoples in Ethiopia. And I think that is very, very telling about the nature of the center. But in terms of Tigray genocide, just to add one more point, Ezekiel, one thing that I found striking and I hadn't quite anticipated was many people in Addis Ababa, the elite, you could say, supported the Tigray genocide, knowing what was happening. Of course, some of them maybe hated Tigrayans and they were happy for Tigrayans to die in their thousands. But there were many people in Addis Ababa who supported the genocide because they believed that if Tigray were to win, it would challenge the assumption that they cherish, the values that they cherish, the desire for Ethiopia to be central. And they would go to the extent of letting millions of people in the service of supporting this idea. So it's a powerful idea that they think they are supporting. I don't think everybody who supported the genocide was because of hatred towards the Tigrayans. I think they would do the same against the Oromos, and we could see that they would do the same against the Amharas. Amharas are now being killed, for instance, and you don't see any sort of opposition because the thinking is that the Amharas should not be seen to be winning because that would challenge the Addis Ababa-based interest groups' ideological foundation that you described. So it's such a powerful thing, and one manifestation of his power is what he mentioned, the capture. And maybe I'll check it that, Ezekiel, how the capture happens, because one thing he mentioned is that it doesn't matter who the people in charge in Ethiopia are. They could be Tigrayans, they could be Oromo, they could be Amharas. In a way, it doesn't matter really. They all end up doing the same thing. They all end up being captured by the same thing. So what is the mechanics? How does this capture process happen?
Well, let me say this, that why did Germany, the country of poets, philosophers, scientists, in the 19th century, early 20th century, the country that contributed to the world Karl Marx or Immanuel Kant or the charismatic Max Weber. This is the country that actually conducted a genocide against the Jews. It's the neighbors that turned against Jews. Their own neighbors turned against the Jews. So when a state, the modern state in the case of Germany, harnessed the scientific and technological capacity of the state to carry out a propaganda to scare people, number one, to scare them, and to promise them utopia that will never happen. People succumb to this idea that Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the 1930s, after observing his own neighbors turning against neighbors, wrote this thing about cultivated stupidity. Cultivated stupidity. And I've written about this also, another article, I don't know if you've seen it, but about cultivated stupidity. Yeah. So this happens. Okay, people, you can mobilize people. You can mobilize people around certain idea if you scare them. You're seeing it in Sweden. By scaring people, there is a chimera that is coming up. There is a ghost that is going to kill you. These immigrants, you don't name them, immigrants are going to do this to you. You can scare people, you can mobilize them into evil doing. It is possible. So it's nothing new in Ethiopia, this happened. It's nothing new. You can mobilize. Why did they go along? People had hope in Ethiopia. People from all ethnic backgrounds had hope in 2080 that at long last that Ethiopia is going to make a transition to a political dispensation that is based on participation, popular participation, economic and social justice, and cultural recognition. They hoped earnestly. And they put their hope on this man, whom they did not know. He just emerged on the scene, and he talked about love, empty words, empty rhetoric, and people thought that their hope is expressed in the person of this individual. Remember, nobody knows him. We didn't know him. He just emerged on the scene, introduced by the man that symbolized the resistance from within, Lamma Magarsa. It was Lamma Magarsa that we followed, that we thought that it would be the leader of the resistance from within and ensure a transition to what Ethiopians hoped for. The vision that I just said. But instead, he designated someone, and people wanted to believe their own aspiration rather than investigate. Their own realization of their own hope rather than verify. So in the man, they saw their hope, their own aspiration, and they refused to be critical thinkers. So when you surrender your incredulity, when you surrender your capacity to verify, that's what happens. The masses will follow you. But the center is still trying. It's still trying to do that. But this time, many Ethiopians are refusing to follow, refusing to endorse. People who turned against Tigray in the war from 2020 to 2022 in the Amhara region, maybe expressed in the Fano, they're not going to wage that war against Tigray this time. They're not. They're not going to do it. So it changes. Times change, people change, but every time people have this, live in a moment of transition, a moment of transition that the Italian political scientist Antonio Gramsci called it an interregnum, where the old hasn't died out and the new hasn't been born. In that midst, and I remember writing about this too, in that midst, people gravitate towards charismatic individuals. Charismatic in what they say. Like, peace, love, and all that, all those things that people want to hear. So people gravitate towards charismatic individuals in crisis times. Let me conclude by saying the example that I used. Why did people follow Hitler? Why did people from the Weimar Republic, the most democratic time in German history, why did they follow him? The crisis that people would take wheelbarrow full of Deutschmark and they buy only a toilet paper. The crisis, when there is crisis, when it looks like, and I'm going to emphasize this one, when it looks like that earthly power, no earthly power could address the problem. Let the people overcome their current difficulties. That's when people suspend their critical thinking power, their incredulity, and succumb to the machinations and the verbal dexterity of a charismatic individual. That's what happened to Ethiopia. But things are changing right now.
Just staying on this issue of capture, Ezekiel, in 2018, when Abiy emerged, as you say, on the scene, on the back of Oromo protesters, I don't think that is a controversial point. I think Abiy came to power riding that protest. Mm-hmm. There was a sense among many people, some of them people who have sympathy for the Oromo struggle, there was a sense that finally the Oromos have liberated themselves and finally they will create a truly decentralized, a truly federal system in Ethiopia. There was that sense, there was that expectation. But of course we know what happened since, which is why the OLF is still fighting now. Was there a sense among the Oromo nationalist veterans like I don't know, like Lencho, for instance, later, that this would happen from experience, because the same happened in 1991 and the same happened during the Derg regime, that there has always been a history of suppression, a history of killing the Oromo momentum. And was there a sense that would happen in 2018 as well?
Initially, there was hope. Just like anyone in Ethiopia, including in the Tigray region, there was hope. And I say Ethiopians, I really mean everybody. There was hope even in Kenya. There was hope in Somalia. In Somalia, that their Oromo brethren in Addis Ababa had risen to power, that there was tremendous hope that at long last Ethiopia is going to be a state, a country of its citizens. And I use the word citizens. Citizens, not your ethnicity, but your legal status and your ability to access the benefits of being a citizen of that country, politically, economically, culturally, and socially. That by virtue of being a citizen, you'll be entitled to all of those. There was hope. The hope was pervasive within Ethiopia, and it flowed over. It overflowed to the neighboring countries as well. So if people were hoodwinked in 2018, overtaken by the euphoria of the moment, I don't blame them. Like I just said, the hope overflowed to other countries as well, right? But I remember writing the Oromo alternative at that time. I'm glad that I wrote, and what I wrote is in writing. I took the Oromo alternative, and my idea at that time was that the Oromo nationalism itself has become mature nationalism, pragmatic nationalism. It did not start off that way, but by that time, the Oromo protest showed the maturity of Oromo nationalism. The Oromo protest that catapulted Abiy Ahmed himself to power was not about taking turns. It should not have been. The Oromos should be able to win elections, to make themselves present in the center. They did not have to play by other rules than democracy. and power sharing, recognition of historical injustices, institutional reform, and acceptance of the pluralism of the country. That was what I hoped for, that they will help Ethiopia overcome the recurring crisis of ethnocracy, followed by rebellions and insurgencies and authoritarian backsliding. But they did not choose that. They abandoned they abandoned these goals when they shouldn't have. They shouldn't have. They could have simply abandoned these ethnocratic fantasies, but they did not. So the goal should have been, the goal at that time should have been for the Oromo, should have been to organize Ethiopia along those lines that Ethiopians have been asking for. Economic justice, whether it's about land and other resources, cultural recognition that this is a country of different cultures, different ethnic groups, recognize and extend power to them as well, share power with them. But under the Oromo themselves, ethnocracy reasserted itself, followed by mass arrests. That's what states react to pragmatic demands. My view was that the Oromo were mobilized as pragmatic resistance during the Oromo protest. The protest was asking for a decentralized rule. It was youth-led, and the demands were around rights and human dignity and self-rule. These were not maximalist demands. These were simply constitutional demands. They demanded the stoppage or stopping of land dispossession, respect for federalism, and allow political participation. These were not maximalist demands. This is a mature nationalism. Okay, this was not the Oromo nationalism was not always inherently separatist. Even the OLF, as early as the 1970s, when they put out their first political program, they said as a political party we want separation, but we don't rule out. This is what the program says of 1976. We don't rule out the possibility that the nations and nationalities could create another form and live together. So it's not inherently separatist. And by 1918, as I was saying, it has become a very pragmatic nationalism. Pragmatic. And the war was waged against that kind of pragmatism. And I've said about the Tigrayan nationalism that it was not maximalist. It was actually put its energy to reconstructing the Ethiopian state away from being the empire of conquest and domination into the empire of social contracts and recognition. That's what they were trying to do. So all of these nationalists that are now bad-mouthed by the Ethiopian Prime Minister, as early as a month ago at Addis Ababa University, when he was talking about intellectuals, he was demonizing the 1960s generation. He was demonizing people who have this ethno-nationalist bent as far as their... It's never ending, and people who do not understand history, who do not understand how societies work, are in power. And now the victims are not only Ethiopians, it's going to be the entire area of the region, because the next war is not going to be confined only in Ethiopia. It's going to be a regional war whose effects is going to reverberate from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean basin.
Well, I think one missed opportunity of 2018 is that what has since happened, the Tigray genocide, the wars happening in Oromia and in Amhara, and of course that is a monumental loss generally. But one missed opportunity in terms of restructuring Ethiopia that the Oromos would have had the right to make fundamental change to the country that the Tigrayans didn't have, because regardless of what the Tigrayans had tried, they would always have been accused of being a minority trying to impose themselves on Ethiopia. I think the Oromos wouldn't have faced that sort of accusation. So they had the right to change Ethiopia in a fundamental way, to fundamentally decentralize the government structure and everything. And that would have, of course, created an Ethiopia where people flourish. And that is a great missed opportunity. And that always makes me sad why serious people like Lemma didn't impose themselves. And I think people like him would have wanted to change the country along the direction that I just mentioned. And that is a tragedy to me. I don't know if you'd like to reflect on that, but I always wonder about that missed opportunity.
Like I just said, the wrong people got into office among the Oromo. Look, they did not have to do a lot. Those who hailed from the Oromo did not have to do a whole lot. It was simply to yield to the demands of the people that were not maximalist. The Tigrayan or the Oromo or the Somali or the Sidama were not inherently separatist. It is the center that always dubs them as separatist. They are simply reactive. They were simply reacting to ethno-nationalist mobilization against them. Or put it this way, the ethno-nationalist mobilization were basically reactive to domination. Domination. The goal of the Oromo nationalist struggle, which by 2018 had become very pragmatist, accepted federation as a form of government, and recognition as an ethnic group and self-rule. They had accepted that formula. And their demands was within that constitutional formula. The demands were within the constitutional formula. Now, were there others who did not accept the constitutionalist formula, who felt that the ethno-nationalist arrangement had actually ostracized them? Of course, the ethno-nationalist formula or the multinational formula had favored group mobilization along ethnic factors, and those civic nationalists did not have a place. And the state institutions were dominated, military, the security apparatus were by ethno-nationalists. That I can understand. But instead, this is my point, instead of addressing the issues, whether that required constitutional reform, what was needed was minimalist reforms, because there were no maximalist demands. There were only reforms. Did the Oromo have that opportunity? They had. Please go read what I wrote in the Oromo Alternative. Domination is going to create a backlash. Whether it's done by Oromos or Tigrayans or Amharas, it is going to lead to ethno-national mobilization. Are you going to tell me today that ethno-nationalist feelings in Ethiopia are less today than they were in 2018? Who's going to tell me that the experiment done by the Prosperity Party has lessened ethnic identity? So 2018, as was 2019, was a turning point. And in 2019, the Tigrayan led, with the Oromo as part of the diarchy, the Oromo OLF, Lencholata and all that, they designed the ethno-nationalist vision for Ethiopia. What was remaining was that federal arrangement with the constitution had some imperfections. They had to be addressed. It was not perfectly implemented. It had to be corrected. The federation needed to be democratized. That's about it. Any country should always address dynamic problems, demands that periodically emerge. And that's the opportunity that we had to reform along the reasonable, constitutional and democratic demands spearheaded by the Oromo youth, but not confined to the Oromo youth. Look, there was a Kero in Oromia, right? But there was also Fano in Amhara, echoing what the Oromos were doing here. But there was a Zerma in Gurage, the Ejeto in Sidama. There was the Berberta in the Somali region, and others. These were youth-led movements. It started in Oromia, but it engulfed the whole of Ethiopia. Those were the same demands. What the Oromo youth demanded was demand of all of these groups. You should have addressed them. The country should have addressed them. Instead, they chose to descend to the old tactic of killing the previous government's officials. Killing them. People who worked for Ethiopia, who sacrificed for Ethiopia. Mengistu Nawai killed people like the Shoan patriot, Ras Ababa. They killed Ras Ababa. Mengistu Haile killed Aklilu Haftawalt. These are people, regardless of their weaknesses and their some of their wrongdoings, they toiled for Ethiopia. They worked for Ethiopia. Ethiopia killed them. In the Tigray war, they killed Siyum Mesfin, for God's sakes. The man that put together, among other achievements of his, the man that put together the Nile Basin Commission, in which the formula was put together that with regards to the Nile Basin Initiative, with regard to the Nile Basin, not the United Nations, not the European Union, not the United States, not the African Union, but the Nile Basin Initiative was to resolve issues by the countries that contributed to the basin, to the water. Even a country that contributes 1 liter of water going to resolve the situation in Ethiopia. Look at what is happening today. Even after the Gerd Dam was completed, the issue has not been settled. It was settled. Why do I say this? The initiative was signed in Cairo, by the Egyptian Prime Minister and the Ethiopian Prime Minister and other African leaders. In Cairo. What does that mean? Cairo had accepted the formula. Cairo was cornered into accepting. Ethiopia killed that man. This government, that they killed that man, just as a symbol of the wrongs that had been perpetrated in Ethiopia. That Siyum Mesfin is just one man, but millions were killed who had contributed and had the potential to contribute to making Ethiopia whole and sustainable.
Well, speaking of Siyum Mesfin, just to add one more thing, because this is something that people in Ethiopia don't mention, especially in Amhara. Alex Dival writes that it was Siyum Mesfin who found a delicate balance, sort of agreement between Sudan and Ethiopia for Amhara farmers along the Amhara-Sudan border, for Amhara farmers to continue using a vast expanse of farmland that is legally owned by Sudan. But of course has since been taken by Sudanese troops now, and the Amhara farmers have been completely hounded out of farmlands that they have used for decades. And it's irony of ironies that he's not credited, first of all, for that, for finding that sort of balance, because in the Amhara political discourse, he's supposed to say only mean things about Siyum, but in fact, it was him who had given Amhara farmers land that they could use for decades without paying any tax or levy on it. And I think that is a typical example of how people like Siyum, despite their contributions, have been completely tarnished by the regime, in addition to being killed, of course, which is much worse.
But not tarnished is not the word. It's not tarnished. He was killed.
Yeah,
He was
of course.
killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let me add to what you said about Al-Fashqa, the land that is Al-Fashqa. It was not taken by the Sudanese. It was given to the Sudanese by the Ethiopian Prime Minister. It was given by the Ethiopian Prime Minister. How do I know that? Because the Sudanese president said so. In return for closing of the border when he's going to kill Tigrayans, he would not even let some Tigrayans escape to the Sudan. In return for that, the Ethiopian Prime Minister gave that land to, in fact, the land that Siyum Mesfin negotiated for Amhara farmers, he gave it to the Sudan. Not just the land, but also the people that were on the land to the Sudan.
Well, just closing the circle on the Oromo nationalism struggle, Ezekiel, you mentioned some people like Lench Olota who have had outsized contribution to the struggle, albeit some people might have critical views of how they handled certain situations. Other people you mentioned in the essay that I mentioned earlier is people like Haile Fida and Taddesse Buru and others. And I wonder what their dreams were and what they would have said if they suddenly woke up today and saw Ethiopia the way it is today. What would their ambition, their dream for the Oromos, and how has it actually panned out?
Well, Taddesse Buru is a soldier. He was also someone who was pushed into Oromo nationalism. He did not believe in ethno-nationalist cause, but he was pushed by the government into embracing it, and he was killed for it. He was really martyred for it. But let me just focus on Haile Fida. Haile Fida, in his own way, in the 1970s, of course, he's an Oromo from where I am from, not very far, about 50 kilometers. He was born where I grew up, 50 kilometers, and he grew up in my town. That's where he grew up. So he's Oromo, and he always believed that the Oromos got the bad side of the bargain all the time. The bargain in Ethiopia believed that, but his solution was not ethno-nationalism. His solution was proletarian internationalism. He believed in that all Ethiopians, all Ethiopian workers and oppressed masses of Ethiopia should aspire liberty, equality, and justice, and that is a legitimate demand, and the state should respond to it. What would he say if he saw Ethiopia today? Well, he died when he was 38 years old, killed when he was 38 years old, some like 40 or nearly 50 years ago, right? He would not recognize Ethiopia today. He would not recognize Ethiopia at all today as a polity. Maybe he would be surprised that there are some paved roads in Addis, and there are some chandelier-looking lights in Addis Ababa. But he would not believe that Ethiopia is a single country that commands the loyalty of all. He would not see that. Is a fragmented country on the verge of disintegration if we do not pull back. Okay? My argument is, they said, this is the last thing that he said, this ethnocratic rigidity has always led to recurring cycles of rebellion, insurgencies, and authoritarian rule. The state always becomes militarized, and because militarization of politics does not solve problems, the state always becomes brittle, has always remained breakable. There were political openings in Ethiopia in 1974, 1991, 2018. But the openings collapsed because elites refused to share power and ushering in structural change. 1991 was different. It was short on implementation, but the idea, I still subscribe to it. But the structural change did not take root. So, in general, Ethiopia's recurring cycle of war, conflict, and instability is not episodic, it is systemic. It is rooted in the refusal to democratize power. And as long as pragmatism does not prevail, as long as negotiation over domination is not selected, as long as institutional pluralism, or put it another way, that cultural homogenization always takes precedence over institutional pluralism, as long as federalism is not chosen as a form of political power sharing, and as long as politics is not conducted as a compromise, as an art of compromise, not winning it all, as long as pragmatism was not selected over ideological predilection, Ethiopia is not going to survive. It's not going to survive as a polity. And I'm going to say this, don't ask me another question, and I'm going to say this, because I have seen it at different episodic moments, that Ethiopia had a structured choice to make for structural transformation, and they have refused to take it. Ethiopia's elite have refused to take it. This time, there is nothing left on the horizon. I have no hope that the pluralist society, shared power, and recognition of differences and cultural or religious, or as long as those are not going to be ushered in this time under this government. And if there is another cycle, because this is going to implode, because it's not governing, if we don't get to these ideas, we will still go through that cycle, a vicious cycle of rebellion, and insurrection and authoritarian consolidation, and we will not solve any problem. And I'm not optimistic this time.
Well, you say that so far we have focused on we have taken stock of the historical background, the theoretical framework, and why things are the way they are. And I think a lot of people are going to find this a useful tool to understanding why Ethiopia is structured in the way it is. I say that with confidence because most of the discussions generally focus on the day-to-day activities, and people are bogged down in developments. And today we have sort of abstracted away from that sort of discussion and try to give people a sense of why. And I think that's useful. But focusing on solution, and that is what he briefly mentioned here, the way is to democratize power. The question is, what is the practical way to do that? One thing that has been historically a stumbling block is a sense of mutual suspicion. I think generally it's easier, for instance, for Tigray and Oromo elites to have discussions about this for historical reasons, but the Amhara elites have always tended to be suspicious about this. But maybe it's changing now. Maybe it's easier to form alliances now. Given your background anyway in these corridors, because you have been trying to also to bring people together to resist and to stand up for their rights and to find enduring solutions, what do you say is the practical way to go about this?
First, accept that the Prosperity Party is not reformable. It will not. Because its leader always decides to take action not from considered options, but from insecurity. When leaders who are psychiatrically impaired, they come to power all the time. They seek power all the time, the world over. You can't change them. You cannot change them. So I refer people to that idea, to the pieces that I had written as late as last week, couple of days ago, on the meaning of the speech that the Prime Minister gave at Addis Ababa University. So it's not reformable. It's not going to change course. That means the opposition must come together. In a practical sense, what is possible and what is necessary is to build coalitions to bring about change. Otherwise, everyone is going to be a loser. What is needed is coalition building. What does that mean? Coalition building does not mean ideological unity. Doesn't mean compromise. It simply means putting your differences aside for another time to focus on a common enemy. You build a coalition based on activities that you agree on, not the principles that divide you. You put this away. So that is really what is possible and what is necessary. But it should begin with some important frameworks. Number one, that accept that Ethiopia is a plural society. Accept that is a fact. That is nothing that you could do. It is a mosaic. Ethiopia is a mosaic of linguistic communities, religious traditions, and regional political identities. That is the first step. Recognition that Ethiopia is a plural political society. Number two, realize that always that unilateral rule, always like ethnocratic rule, that is, always ends in a crisis. And that's where we are right now. That's really in a multidimensional crisis that any one group cannot resolve. That's why the coalition building is what is needed and what is necessary. The third issue is the state is too weak at this point in time for zero-sum politics, the variety of which you and I were talking about until now. It could only be resolved together. It could only be resolved together. Realize that a third point. The situation prevailing in Ethiopia is too fragile, too brittle, too weak for the cutthroat competition, the winner-take-all of competition. We can't. That means that should behoove everybody to seeking coalition building on activities, not around activities, not ideas, activities. Like, for instance, we shouldn't destroy the state because we all are going to lose when there is no common authority, right? Realize the common danger is what I'm saying. Fourth, I think the public is exhausted. The Ethiopian public is exhausted, especially by elite betrayal. The betrayal of the Ethiopian masses by their elite. So, in coalition building, if we succeed in bringing these groups agreeing on activities, that kind of coalition building could signal maturity and responsibility on the part of the elite to the common man, so that it is necessary. I can go on that why this is very important, right? But what is needed at this point in time is coalition building, not on the issues that we agree on, but the activities that should bring us together. The fact that we are going to be all losers should tell you you are in danger. All of us are in danger. At least we have that in common, right? The common danger itself should bring you together. But that's my answer to it.
What I think coalition building is a brilliant idea. I think some people might be cynical about it because historically coalition building in Ethiopia hasn't quite succeeded, and people will have their own skepticisms and suspicions about that. But otherwise, I completely agree with that. But one hopes that things will be different this time around, because the developments in Ethiopia are unprecedented. And until now, we have tried doggedly avoided getting into current developments, but maybe it would be a remiss if we didn't talk about.
Okay, the point that you raised about we haven't succeeded in coalition building. I understand that, right? We haven't. But coalition building is not just one type. And I just said, instead of focusing on what brings us the issues that we agree on, let's solve on the common danger. That's another way of bringing people together. Another point. How are we going to govern even if this government falls under the weight of its own misdeeds? Mm-hmm. Is there any other formula? Coalition building should be seen as a rehearsal for democracy. It's not about today alone. We have no choice. Maybe at other points we had time for zero-sum politics, but we don't right now. We don't. It's a mutually assured destruction, and this is a different time. Is what I just wanted to say, that there is no alternative to this for democracy. This is where we start to rehearse democracy. This is where we try to prevent national disintegration. No alternative. When you're pushed against, your back is against the wall, that's when you can get the attention of people. So different times are different times. In the past, we didn't succeed for different approaches and different times. That's a different sense of urgency. But we have no choice this time, is what I was trying to say.
I hear you. Just to get into some current matters in Tigray, as you will have read on the news, there is a sense of panic and fear in Tigray because the regime has out of the blue started drone strikes in Tigray. What is your reading of what is happening?
Well, it's a repeat of the first war that's going on. The state of war hasn't stopped even after Pretoria. The hot war stopped, but the cold war continued. The exchange of belligerent rhetoric continued, and it escalated in recent days. The federal government, it's not only rhetoric, and I mentioned one of them earlier when the chief of staff of the armed forces was telling the Tigray people, say, you have a constitutional right to secede. You tell them to secede, all right? Only give us back the weapons, and then you can go. And then you accuse them of colluding with Eritrea. Well, you just told them to go. You just told them to go. Go leave Ethiopia, all right? So when this kind of the kind of rhetoric that is exercised by the chief of staff of Ethiopia's armed forces, that should signal to you that they're preparing for some kind of confrontation. This has been going on for some time, is what I'm saying. There are actions by the government, like withholding $20 billion that was allocated to Tigray. That is what Tigray, the minimum that Tigray deserves. Unrepresented in the Ethiopian government, unrepresented in the executive, unrepresented in the military, unrepresented in anything Ethiopian. At least they had, even from a humanitarian perspective, that Ethiopia should have sent the 20 billion, because people in Tigray work for the government and they deserve to be paid their salaries. But the Ethiopian government was withholding. It's an act of war. People are not able to withdraw their money, their own money from the bank. Okay? That's their money. That's what they're going to use to buy food. Sending 7% of the field that is needed in Tigray is another siege, is another act of war in the context of a state of war that has never evaporated. Training the Tekeze Brigade in Western Tigray is telegraphing a message that Ethiopian government is actually consecrating territory taken by force, despite the Ethiopian constitution and the agreement that they had signed with TPLF, and then dismissing that dismissing that the Pretoria Agreement, saying that we didn't sign it with the TPLF, we signed it with a few individuals. All of that belligerent rhetoric has been going on. It simply shows you that the Ethiopian government wants conflict, training, recruiting Tigrayans, and then training in Afar region with the express purpose of defeating the TPLF by force. This is done by the Ethiopians. This is done by the Ethiopians, or the Tigray party that has now chosen to collaborate or become the Tigrayan arm of the Prosperity Party, telling this the same thing, and even saying, why don't you bring out your cannon so that we can hit you with with drones and all that. All of these things are happening. So the war had been going on. So if some clashes have occurred in Tigray, the Tigrayan side have been warning, including the president of the interim government of Tigray, who was saying that the fact that the issues that were agreed upon in the Pretoria agreement, that they are not respected and implemented 3 years after signing, is likely to lead to war. This is the General Tadis is saying that. At different times, TDF leaders have also pronounced the same thing. TPLF had been sending out press releases after press releases saying that we're being squeezed, but we're not going to take it anymore. That's physics. It's your field, Taklai. That's physics. You press something, it will snap back, doesn't it? So the pressure had been mounting from the Ethiopian side. They were taking actions, trying to build a siege around them, talking about a war with Eritrea as if Tigray doesn't exist. All of that had created the lack of trust on the part of politicians in Tigray, and may have led to skirmishes in Tigray. That likelihood that it would escalate is real, because the Prosperity Party has no intention of backing down. They want the conflict to justify their existence. They are seeking out conflict. This is entirely, and let me emphasize this point. I know there are so many people in Ethiopia who feel that they were swindled out of Assad by Eritrea and TPLF and ELF. I know there are a lot of people that believe that. This time, it's not Eritrea that is seeking war with Ethiopia. It is Ethiopia that said, I deserve Assad, and I'm going to take it by hook or by crook. Through Bale or Bole is the Ethiopian National Defense Force Chief of Staff that said that. This time, it is not Eritrea. This time, if the war started in Tigray, it's not because of Tigray. I listed the reasons, including the non-recognition or the deregistration of TPLF as a political party. All of these are measures to ensure another round of conflict. If war breaks out, this time there will be no attack of the Northern Front. There will be no excuse. It is precipitated. The war is precipitated entirely by the Ethiopian government. And people should wake up. Should wake up. The government that brought the Eritrean forces and allowed them to take revenge out on Tigrayans only 4 years ago or 5 years ago cannot turn around and tell you Eritrea is your historical enemy. You have to be really stupid to believe that. And I'm saying about the people, you have totally, and stupidity I'm using in the Dietrich Bonhoeffer sense. If Abiy Ahmed could convince you that Eritrea is Ethiopia's historic friend only 6 years ago, saying that he is going to serve as Eritrea's, he was named by Isaias as Eritrea's chief
foreign minister.
Foreign minister. If that same guy is coming and turning around and telling you that Eritrea is your erstwhile historic enemy, the burden is on yours, on the Ethiopian people. If he could convince you on this one, if they could convince you that it's TPLF, the problem is TPLF, if after all of the wrongs that had listed in Afar, in Western Tigray, in the Dabark area, which is around in all of these areas, if it is TPLF, if you believe this, you are stupid. Stupidity is on you, not the government.
Well, I think one problem generally is, and I don't want to be unfair to people, but there is a huge groundswell of credulity in Ethiopia, and people could easily be made to believe that 2 + 2 is 4 today, and be made to believe that 2 + 2 is actually 5 tomorrow with ease. You don't even need to invest. Something that is said with authority seems to carry weight in Ethiopia. I mean, I have always wondered why it is that people believe a lot of nonsense from regime officials. But you mentioned the Pretoria Agreement, Ezekiel. I think it's no surprise that the Ethiopian regime doesn't want to mention it, that it wants to abandon it, because otherwise it will be beholden to the provisions of the agreement, the return of Western Tigray, the return of people, the issue of justice and accountability, the reconstruction of Tigray. These are things that the regime doesn't want to touch, even with a barge pole. And they want to be done with the agreement. So there is no surprise. I think one surprise, probably among many Tigrayans, I would say, including me, is why the people who were supposed to be observers of the agreement, who were supposed to help implement the agreement, have completely left the scene as well. The Americans, the Europeans, the African Union. Maybe no surprise in terms of the African Union. I think that is where there is a sense of confusion and puzzlement among Tigrayans. And if you would like to reflect on that, why they completely left the agreement to die?
Why would they care? Why should they care?
That's a cold.
Why that the
that's
United
a cold,
States should care?
hard analysis. Yeah. Why would they care? Okay.
I mean, they have their own issues. Is it the protection of human rights? Why would they care? What would interest them?
Well, they seem to care to push them into the agreement, because both parties were arm twisted into signing the document in Pretoria. There is no doubt about that. So there was a degree of momentum then by the Americans, by the Europeans, but all of a sudden that momentum has completely disappeared. So I think it's natural to ask what changed, why.
I'm saying they have no incentives. I don't know. This is what I'm just asking a fundamental question. What would bring the pressure upon any government to make sure that the two sides that signed the agreement, the two sides, the TPLF and the government, respected the agreement? Is it not in the interest of on both sides, the Tigray side and the Ethiopian government side, to respect what they had signed? Why should they be forced into respecting what they had already agreed to? Why would other parties be expected to enforce the agreement? I think it's a misplaced expectation. I had already said that the Ethiopian government is not interested in peace. It is interested in conflict. That's what it wants, because that is how it could divert attention from its misrule. This is the Ethiopian government. I think I've answered it, that it is squarely upon the Ethiopian government. And I don't expect the African Union or the United Nations, as enfeebled as they are in today's world, or the United States government, instead of talking about Greenland or Venezuela, they care about what? I don't think that they care. They might be interested in Abraham Accords. That would be their interest. Other than that, enforcing an agreement is not in their interest. It's not in their vital interest. These are remote things that are happening in the remotest parts of the world, they have no interest.
Yeah. Well, Trump said he was pushed to create what he called the Board of Peace because he said the UN is feeble and the UN hasn't objected yet. So maybe the UN itself accepts its feebleness, I suppose. Just one final
How does the
point.
UN object to the United States? The UN is an organization of governments. The UN cannot object to the United States or any government, in fact. So the UN is not an independent entity with its own power. It is simply enforcing what the international community agrees to in the Security Council. I'm sure the Secretary General had made some pronouncements, but he's leaving. That's why he's saying things that are about his pay grade. But the United Nations is as good as the member parties' agreement. Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, I think what you're saying in terms of the UN coheres with what people have been saying regarding the speech that the Canadian Prime Minister gave at Davos. But just one final point, Ezekiel. You mentioned, and also because I wanted to bring to the attention of our viewers an essay that you have written for Addis Standard about the presentation that Abiy Ahmed gave at Addis Ababa University on the occasion of, what was it, 75th anniversary. If you could just give us one brief outline of what you have written and why you thought that presentation was important in some sense.
Look, it's not only that. I have written so many things about the man at the helm of the Ethiopian state. I'm trying to explain not only to Ethiopians, to the rest of the world, my take on who is actually leading Ethiopia. My article about Machiavellian or megalomaniac or worse than evil, and this time about I think it says deluge, defense and demolition, is trying to assert control over epistemic control over knowledge in Ethiopia. It's not just the institutions of government, it's now on knowledge itself. So deluge is that this plethora of definitions of what is an intellectual, what's not an intellectual, is an attempt of conceptual takeover to define who is qualified as an intellectual or not. I think people could read it, but defense is simply using the rostrum, the platform to speak down to professors, defending his policies so far, the policies that he had implemented, including the war, it's a defense of the conduct of his government in the past, but also a defense of what it is doing right now, and historical positioning himself in what he is going to do in the future. And the third is the demolition. It is simply to take control over the institution of Addis Ababa universities and other universities, telling them, listen, in the question and answer session, he was asked about AI, and he turned around the question and he said, oh, that question is about the relevance of a university altogether, whether a university is relevant or not. And his answer was that he's going to establish an AI university, his pet project. He said this will be the second university in the world on AI, right? Do you know where the other universities on AI is? The only one other university that exists is the Mohammed bin Zayed University of AI in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai. I think it's in Abu Dhabi. The second is going to be in Ethiopia, telling the Addis Ababa University, this historic institution, you're not going to matter. AI is going to replace everybody, and I'm going to establish an AI university. So those three things, the summary is those three things. Define what is an intellectual by the executive. decide to use epistemology to defend your record and your plans. And third, undermine the institution that had actually been the source of critical thinking and the center of the site of resistance against injustice in Ethiopia. Exercise control over the institution itself. Deluge of definitions, defense of behavior, and demolition of an institution. That's what.
Well, I'm going to put a link to that as well, so people could read that. And you had a fascinating conversation with Tzadala Lemma on her the Standard Signal podcast, which I like, and I invite people to watch as well. And I like that you put your thoughts in writing, Ezekiel, and I think that is the reason why you speak with such clarity, because if you write your thoughts, it helps you when you speak as well. And maybe this is an example that I should be inspired by as well to start writing and all that. And we like having you on, as I always say, Ezekiel, and our viewers like listening to you as well. Some people do disagree with you, of course, but even the people who disagree with you, unanimous in their appreciation that you speak what you believe, that you are very clear, that you are unafraid, which is very important because, just one thing in the Abiy presentation, I watched some clips, and one thing that was striking for me was senior established professors debasing themselves and shaking when they were pretending to ask questions. And I think people are used to that sort of debasement and self-abnegation, that when they see people like you who are brave and afraid, they say, wow, there are these people as well. So we appreciate that, and thank you for the time.
Well, a lot of those people that were sitting in front of him, maybe about a third of them, not all of them, some a third of them are my friends from Addis Ababa University. I know for sure, for certain, they don't believe a word of what he's saying. They're deep individuals, they know, but they're pretending to take notes, some of them. But I know that they're not reducible to note takers. Those are solid intellectuals. They don't believe a word of what he's saying.
Well, they can't, because my field is computer science, and the thing that he says in relation to computer science make me laugh. And I suppose this is the same experience for people like you in the thing that you care about as well. Thank you very much, Ezekiel. It was such a pleasure, as always.